Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, and our brand new movie review. We're going to take a look at what is considered to be Tarkovsky's masterpiece, and that is the movie Stalker. It's only the second movie I've watched by Tarkovsky, but this film is considered his masterpiece. It's a play in 3 acts. There's the apocalypse, post-apocalyptic negation and affirmation, and post-apocalyptic Christian teleology. It is a Christian movie, and he actually quotes scripture in it, but it's all about trying to hold on to faith in a post-apocalyptic time, and that's a post-nuclear apocalyptic time. So let's go to block 1 and begin our analysis of this film. The apocalypse. After Keystone nuclear disaster. It occurred in 1957, but this nuclear disaster was not disclosed to the public until 1976. Stalker came out 3 years later, 1979. So basically he started this film when the news was released in 1976 about a previously concealed incident, the Keystone nuclear disaster. Keystone was a nuclear weapons plant. The explosion covered the atmosphere with plutonium fallout. 270,000 people were contaminated. Only 10,000 people were evacuated. Cancer, birth defects, deformity followed in large number. This nuclear disaster was apocalyptic in nature. It was a horrendous nuclear catastrophe not admitted to, but instead covered up by the Russian government. From 1957 to 1976, it was never disclosed that this disaster took place. Now the movie, Stalker, the surface story, the 3 main characters are Stalker, Alexander Kaidanovsky, the writer, Anatoly Solzhenitsyn, Professor Nikolai Ganko. Everyone lives in the nuclear devastated region of condemned buildings and handicapped children, but there does exist a triangular zone of no contamination, and it is unpopulated. It is said to contain a room of promise that fulfills one's wishes. The zone is a place supposedly where one's wishes can be fulfilled, hope can be restored. But everyone lives in a industrial type region of condemned buildings. Now the color scheme. The film begins in sepia tone. That signifies contamination by nuclear fallout. That's the reason for the sepia tone. It reminds you that you're watching nuclear contaminated living conditions. So it begins in sepia tone, but when they reach the zone, the film will shift to color to symbolize new possibilities for hope. The Stalker is a guide who takes professor and writer into and through the zone. It symbolizes a zone of transcendence, a zone of divine help. Now the question put to the audience is this: is it even possible to write a post-apocalyptic theology or a post-apocalyptic teleology? How do these people cope with this nuclear disaster that they've suffered from? how does one restore faith? How does one restore Christian theology? That's the question put to the audience. Now, the 3-point prologue, we first read in the subtitles, "There appeared a miracle, the zone. It is immediately declared that the zone is a place of transcendence. It is protected by the military, although there is doubt as to if this was the proper thing to do." So, the zone is a miraculous appearance of a zone of divine transcendence. Now, the wife represents temporal existence, finitude. The stalker and his family live in an industrial area with no sense of home. On the nightstand are pills and a syringe. They need to be medicated to even live in this disastrous apocalyptic area. The wife awakens and realizes that Stalker is going into the zone again, illegally, even though he has been imprisoned before for doing so. Time and eternity. The wife asks, "Why did you take my watch?" And it is symbolically because Stalker is going to transition from time to eternity, from finitude to transcendence. The wife, who represents finite reality, declares, "I can't keep waiting for you. I will die. I will die." So we're left with a question. How do we save a finite reality, a post-apocalyptic finite reality, and imprint it with God's transcendence? These people have suffered plutonium fallout. Their children are deformed, handicapped. And how do you speak of God after a post-apocalyptic nuclear disaster? How do you write a theology? That is the question put to the audience for this film. Stalker is going to guide the professor and the writer into the zone and through the zone in the hope that maybe they can find a way to formulate and write a new theology, a post-apocalyptic theology. Because what they feel is God-forsakenness. And that'll be made very clear in this film. What they feel, what they live in, the conditions they live in, this sepia tone plutonium contamination, it feels like God has forsaken them. How do you write a Christian theology in the midst of the feelings of God-forsakenness? Let's move on to Block 2. Now in Block 2, we look at the apocalyptic loss of hope and the desire for inspiration and truth. Loss of hope. The world is ruled by cast iron laws that cannot be broken, so it seems. Life has become tedious. The three lead characters meet in a dive bar. All three are seekers of truth. The search for meaningful truth in an apocalyptic age. They take a rail car into the zone. They pass through mile after mile of industrial rubble. The military is afraid to follow. When they reach the zone, the film transitions to color. New possibilities emerge. The color of new possibilities in the zone. It is less industrial, and it has vegetation. And the first declaration that they make is home at last. Humanity can feel at home here. It is called the quietest place on earth. There's space for contemplation of God, contemplation of Christ. They discuss the tradition of one who had been a teacher. They actually have a tradition from the teacher that they remember. So this past teacher is recalled. But to enter this zone, out of the devastation of apocalyptic contamination into the transition to color in the film and a realm of transcendence, a realm where supposedly there's a room where dreams and wishes and hope will be fulfilled. The stalker is to direct them and guide them to this destination. Now, Act 3 is the post-apocalyptic Christian eschatology. Now, Tarkovsky brings in faith, revelation, and hope. Now, the order of travel through the zone is first the professor. He represents physical reality. That is evaluated first. Then the writer, who represents reason and rational concepts. Then the stalker, who represents spiritual discernment. And theological truth. They are to form a mental construct in reverence. Discipline is demanded in the zone. Things will change when humanity interacts with the zone. The truth reached will transcend all language, we're told. Now, when we enter part 2 of the film, it says part 2. Then you enter into faith and revelation and a call for hope. So faith. They are told they must have belief like children, be pliable and receptive, to remember Simon Peter and guard against doubt. The stalker says, remember Simon Peter when he tried to walk on water and doubted and then fell. Guard against doubt. The second thing is revelation, because the stalker describes the God-forsakenness of Christ on the cross, the 9th hour, 3 p.m. He also quotes Luke 23:37 of Christ speaking of the day of judgment or the day of wrath. And then he narrates the resurrection experience of the two men on the road to Emmaus and how Christ unveiled his resurrection presence to the two men on the road to Emmaus. So there is this unveiling of revelation that the stalker hopes the professor and the writer will take up in order to find a way to write a new teleology, a new hope, a hope based on faith even when facing the God-forsakenness of the cross of Christ. A God-forsakenness they live in this post-nuclear apocalyptic age. The stalker prays and hopes they will find faith. And we want them to find faith. We want them to find resurrection theology beyond the God-forsakenness of the cross. A resurrection theology that will counter the God-forsakenness of a post-nuclear apocalyptic age. How do Russian citizens live after the Keystone nuclear disaster of birth defects, handicapped children, extreme huge number of cancer deaths, death and destruction and handicapped children? How do they find a way to find faith and Christian theology in a post-nuclear apocalyptic age? So if you look at Block 3, Act 3, the final note, unfortunately for Tarkovsky, the conclusion to the movie is that the writer and the professor do not believe like children. They do not have a faith in resurrection after God-forsakenness. Therefore, Block 3, Note 5, the Stalker says the capacity for faith is gone. Happiness, freedom, dignity are no longer spiritual goals. No one believes anymore. So after this trip, after this journey, the Stalker has failed. The spiritual guide has failed. The veil has not been lifted. The writer and the professor do not find hope, do not find a way to rewrite Christian theology in the midst of post-apocalyptic nuclear God-forsakenness. Even though the Stalker tried to point out that the God-forsakenness of Christ on the cross was conquered in the resurrection, he tried to explain that to them. He tried to get them to see that revelation. They did not see that revelation. They did not come back with faith. They did not learn resurrection hope. They did not learn to write a new theology. So the film ends with a tragic, defeatist ending. It ends with a declaration from the Stalker that the capacity for faith is gone. Humanity can only be rescued by grace. Humanity can only be rescued by a transcendent grace that actually creates birth from above, because it can't happen through the guidance of even spiritual leadership. The writer and the professor do not believe like children. They do not find faith. They do not find hope. So the ending is tragic. It is basically a declaration that a renewed theological teleology can only come from being born from above, being reborn from above, because it did not happen through the Stalker's spiritual discernment and leadership, even his speaking the words of revelatory truth, the scriptures on the God-forsakenness of the ninth hour, the apocalyptic God-forsakenness of Christ on the cross, the declaration, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And then, to follow that up with testimony about the two men on the road to Emmaus and the appearance of a resurrected Christ. There is an answer to God-forsakenness. But the professor, the writer, did not believe in simple faith. They did not come back with faith or hope. And tragically, the film concludes with the declaration by the Stalker that the capacity for faith is gone. Post-apocalyptic nuclear disaster has won the day. Faith is gone. And something greater than man himself must intervene. There must be rebirth from above. That's Andrei Tarkovsky's masterpiece apocalyptic movie Stalker, a play in 3 acts. It began in sepia tone, representing plutonium contamination from nuclear fallout, and then, when they reach the zone of transcendence, the film transitions to color, where hope and faith is a possibility. and where the Stalker even speaks the revelatory content of Scripture. He speaks of the crucifixion. He speaks of God-forsakenness on the cross. And he speaks of resurrection experience, the two men on the road to Emmaus. But in conclusion, we end up with the declaration that the capacity for faith is gone, and new Christian hope, new Christian theology can only come from rebirth from above. Well, that'll wrap up our review of Stalker by Andrei Tarkovsky.